I like to walk the train tracks near the campground. It's peaceful. Gives me time to think about what I'm going to do next. I don't always kill randomly. Typically, I plot out my kills, down to the smallest detail. Sometimes I think that I'm a perfectionist, even if the kill doesn't go as planned. Which being said, that reminds me of a kill last year around the 4th of July. I'll get to that in a minute. First, I'd like to tell you about myself. I'm a 32-year-old black male, about 235 pounds of muscle, and I'm 6 feet tall. I came from a loving home. Both of my parents were hard-working, loving people. This is until about 2 years ago. Anyway, the story I'm about to tell is not in any way my cleanest kill, but it is my largest. It was July 3rd, and I was walking along the train tracks near the campground. I stopped and stared over at the lake for what seemed like 5 minutes. That's when I heard 2 cars drive up to the camping spot just behind the thin line of trees. I crept over to the trees and saw 8 people get out of the cars. All of them were men and looked to all be around 28 years old. I saw that they would be great kills, as I haven't had a decent kill in 3 months. I watched them unpack all of their stuff. One of the men was struggling to lift the case that was holding the tent. What a pussy. I knew that he would be my first victim. I don't know why, but weak people piss me off, and I tend to kill them with a lot of hate. I remember a time where a skinny guy about 140 pounds bumped into me at a store, and I just had so much rage in that kill. But that's a story for another time. Back to the campground. I remember seeing a man with them who looked like he hadn't been out of the house in months. The other 6 looked like your average douchebag preps. The type of people that think that they're better than everyone else. I think I hate them the most. I walked down the tracks and went over in my head about what I was going to do. Split their gut open? Peel the skin off their faces? No, that's too cliche. I get tired of seeing so many people not be original. So I continued to think. Then it came to me. Yeah, that could work, I said out loud. I usually have a tendency to talk to myself when I'm planning a kill. It's such a bad habit. I walk on a little further and remember that there's an old cabin close by. Nobody uses it anymore. So that could be the perfect place to complete my next accomplishment. But how would I get all 8 of them there? I may need help on this one, but I hate having to depend on those types of people. The type of people that only help you if you pay them. What happened to just killing for the fun of it? Everything is about money now. I think I know how I'll be able to get all of them to the cabin. So let's skip ahead. I waited until dark and went up to them. I asked the skinny guy what his name is. He said, "My name is Jack." I didn't say anything for a minute. I said, "They're in the cooler on the porch." I went and got it and set it by the steps. We all talked for what seemed like an hour, and they seemed to be having a good time. By this time, it was like 12 a.m. I asked if they were ready for the show. The smaller guy, John, said, "Hell yeah, let's get this going." I said, "They're in the cooler on the porch." I went and got it and set it by the steps. We all talked for what seemed like an hour, and they seemed to be having a good time. By this time, it was like 12 a.m. I asked if they were ready for the show. The smaller guy, John, said, "Hell yeah, let's get this going." They were all pretty drunk. I walked over to the fireworks and lit all of the fuses that I had tied together and ran off towards the other side. After about 5 seconds, they all shot off straight towards their faces just as I had planned. They all screamed in pain, and I ran over and grabbed the rope. I tied all of them up, except for the biggest guy. There wasn't enough rope for him, so I ran to the back of the cabin and grabbed a large chain and tied him up. I drug all of them away from each other so that they couldn't try and untie each other. I dragged Jack off towards the back of the cabin. I squatted down, looked him in the face, and said, "I fucking hate pussies like you." I grabbed a Roman candle and shoved it in his mouth and lit it. The spark sprayed all over his face as he screamed. I just laughed and grabbed a pair of meat hooks. I shoved him into his armpits and hung him on the wall of the cabin. I took out a bottle rocket, placed it capside first into his mouth, and lit the fuse. As it exploded, pieces of his face went with it. I could damn near see his jawbone. I balled up my fist and started punching him right in the ribs. With the last punch, I could feel his ribs crack. He was slowly beginning to lose his breath, so I decided to put him out of his misery. I took out my serrated pocket knife and jammed it into his chest. I pulled the knife until it formed a perfect circle. I then started to rip off the skin. Once that was done, I decided to move on to Mitch. Being pure muscle, I was able to drag him with ease. At the back of the cabin, he saw Jack and tried desperately to get free. I punched him in the jaw and knocked him out. Fucking pussy with a weak chin. I lit a blowtorch and pressed it against the side of his head. He came to and instantly screamed like I was trying to kill him. I told him to shut the fuck up, that I wasn't going to kill him right now. The smell from his torched flesh was an unforgettable odor. It was lovely, the sweet smell of charred flesh mixed with the odor of fireworks. I wrapped the rope around his thick neck. The fat bastard barely even had a neck. I twisted it tighter and tighter. He was gasping for a breath with all of his might. I released the rope, and he gagged. I asked if he was hungry, and again, being the rude fuck that he was, yelled out, "Fuck you, you're a goddamn psycho." I went into the cabin and grabbed a pack of hot dogs, went back over to him, and started shoving them down his throat. He gagged and struggled to breathe again. I snatched them out and told him that he really should work on his manners. I took the serrated knife, grabbed his tongue with some pliers, and sliced it off with ease. The blood rushed from his mouth. I shoved the hot dogs back down his throat and went back to the front of the cabin. This was beginning to be a long process, so I decided to go 2 by 2 now. I dragged 2 of the other preps back to the back of the cabin. I went into a shed and grabbed a crowbar, went over to one of them, and bashed it into their knee. I felt it crack with the impact. He screamed and struggled, but all that made me do was smash the crowbar into his ribs. He gasped, and I took the end of it and rammed it into his ribcage. I lit the blowtorch again and pressed it to his balls. He screamed such a wonderful sound. I love the sound they make when I do that. It's almost orgasmic. I dragged the blowtorch up his stomach, all the way to his face, and held it there. He passed out from the pain, so I slit his throat and watched as the blood rushed out. I moved to the other guy, and well, let's just say he didn't have as nice of a time as his friends. He spat in my face and called me the N-word, so for that, I cut off his pants and sliced off his dick. He screamed in agony. Blood was rushing out, and I took the knife and stuck it in where his dick used to be and twisted it about 6 times. I then grabbed his ball sack and put it in a vice grip and turned it as tight as it would go. They busted open. The blood sprayed out everywhere. He was screaming so loud that I had to shut him up somehow, so I took his dick and rammed it down his throat. It was fun watching them squirm when they were choking for a breath. I hit his hands with a crowbar about 4 times. They turned a purplish red color, so I hit them a couple more times. I took my hands and squeezed his neck until his life left his body. I went back to the front and dragged the last 2 to the back. I started off by taking the knife and cutting off the first guy's ears. He screamed and blood rushed out. I grabbed a string of firecrackers, tore off 2, and placed them in his ear holes. I lit them and laughed as they exploded. He tried to get free, so I just stomped his face until he stopped moving. "Damn it," I said. I must have knocked him out. I poured gas on him to get him back conscious. I was beginning to get bored and wanted a little more bang, so I poured gas all over him and the last guy also. Threw a roll of about 100 firecrackers on them, dropped a match, stepped back, and watched as the firecrackers exploded and they burned alive. I walked down the train tracks and thought about how that was one explosive 4th of July.